I recently joined a fairly serious and I guess ambitious organization of Star Citizen players. The way our activities, attending training, conducting 24/7 patrols, obtaining certifications are assembled has me thinking about Transworld identity. The relevance of such questions are obvious, I think, when we consider counterfactual claims such as if Susie had been born to a more affluent family, Susie would have been less statistically likely to drop out of high school. One way to look at such claims and similar ones is to look at the influential paper Truth and Fiction by David Lewis. And so that's what I'm going to do here today. So first consider the counterfactual claim. We'll call it counterfactual Susie. If Susie had been born to a more affluent family, she would have been less statistically likely to drop out of high school. One question is, how should I understand the identity of the Susie who was born to a more affluent family in relation with the Susie who drops out of high school? Are they the same person? Similarly, I could ask, how should I understand the identity of the character Red Ape Music in Star Citizen in contrast with the identity of the character Red Ape Music in the Discord chat where our org's activities are organized and discussed? Considering the counterfactual claim above, this is a question about whether Susie in the actual world, the world where she was born to a less affluent family, is the same Susie in the counterfactual one where she becomes a doctor with all else being equal. In the same way, it is also a question about whether my discussions about Star Citizen in the real world, i.e. the org's Discord channel, is the same as the Red Ape Music who conducts raids, completes missions, and blows up often in Star Citizen. Both Red Ape Music in the game Star Citizen and Red Ape Music in the org's channel and Discord have a number of flight hours, but it would seem that only one has certain certifications and trainings while the other has experience but not necessarily certifications, since certifications such as these are only available in our organization. Further, it is not clear whether I can log flight time in the Discord group, since I have to log into the game to do so. As such, there is a Red Ape Music who has N number of flight hours, and a Red Ape Music who has N number of certifications and trainings. But how do we analyze their identity in relationship to one another? Are they identical? Are the two Red Ape Musics identical? David Lewis treats this as a question about how the description of truth quantifies over trans worlds in, out, and between fictional worlds. Accordingly, if we can ascribe the predicate true to identical propositions about each, then they are identical. Imagine if we could treat the following statements synonymously. I reside at New Babbage on Microtech. I am currently on deployment at New Babbage on Microtech. How do we understand the truth value of a claim about Sherlock Holmes as depicted in the fiction, or discussed in the classroom, or on a Discord chat for that matter, about Sherlock Holmes? On the one hand, we might confuse this question as one about fictional indeterminacy. But fictional indeterminacy is a question about events that are left unsaid by a given fiction. This usually leaves open a space for fan fiction and other sorts of fiction about fiction, I guess you might call it. But although fictional indeterminacy is also a question about truth in fiction, it is helpful to address the various issues about what is true in fiction first, and do this separately from questions about fictional indeterminacy. Another issue that arises is vacuous truth. A vacuous truth is a truth on a condition that never applies. At first glance, it would seem that true propositions about fictional entities are vacuously true. Their truth is grounded in a conditional statement that only applies in a given context. David Lewis begins his paper Truth and Fiction in a similar way, with a similar claim. Because Sherlock Holmes is a character in fiction, many of the claims that we may make about Sherlock Holmes are ambiguous, and as such, their truth value can be dubious as well. This is because they are vacuously true. In a similar fashion, when attempting to get certified in my organization, I hop onto Discord and submit a request for a more senior member to certify my activities in the game. I do this by telling the truth about known matters of fact. For instance, on Wednesday at 1600 hours, I conducted a bunker raid mission at location X on Daymar, recovering 2 missing persons, etc. But how can I tell the truth about something that happened in a fiction? So here's Transworld identity. In a given fiction, we have an act of storytelling. In a given context, we have an act of telling the truth about known matters of fact. To begin with, David Lewis argues that we can resolve the ambiguity regarding assigning various truth values in fiction by using context and content. An important question here, however, is how do we assign the proper truth variable? His solution relies on what he calls prefixing. Let's begin attempting to understand prefixing first. Since at the address where Sherlock Holmes is said to live there is a bank, if we treated such claims similarly, then given the truth of fiction F, it would follow that Holmes lives in a bank in the same way my membership in a Star Citizen organization means that I might be a family man on deployment at New Babbage in pursuit of my organizational membership obligations, for instance. I can meet up with friends at various locations throughout New Babbage, including my hangar. However, because of technical limitations owing to planned upcoming changes to the game's hardware, friends and other members cannot stop by my habitation unit, though I can invite them to my hangar for a virtual beer and chat. But this does not follow because of prefixing, so some questions emerge. Consider the following. Unprefixed. Holmes lives at 221B Baker Street. Unprefixed, if Holmes did live at 221B Baker Street, then it would be true that Holmes lives at a bank. But what do we do with the statement? Is the statement true or false? Well, in one sense, Holmes did live at 221B Baker Street. Does he live there now? It is not clear since currently there is a bank at this address. I couldn't begin to tell you what is at the location where I conducted my raid mission. As such, the truth value that we might ascribe to Baker is dubious. However, we can amend it somewhat and make it less dubious in one of 2 ways. We can prefix it. In fiction F, Baker, meaning in fiction F, Holmes lived at 221B Baker Street. Or unprefixed, we would say Holmes lives in a bank. So, how might we analyze prefix propositions? Which propositions count as prefixed? Consider the following. We'll call this one hair. Holmes has an even number of hairs on his head. Or we could say, we can amend this a little bit and say, or I, Reddit Music, has n number of hairs on my head. Holmes has an odd number of hairs on his head, or, once again, I, Reddit Music, has n number of hairs on my head. Which of the above propositions are properly prefixed? Namely, which of the above propositions can we say in fiction F, Holmes has an n number of hairs on his head, or I, Reddit Music, has n number of hairs on my head? So this would be a case of fictional indeterminacy because it's never specified how many strands of hair are on Holmes' head or Reddit Music's head. But once again, we were talking about identity, and it's not clear that fictional indeterminacy is going to help us solve questions about identity or transworld identity. So the first problem that Lewis sees here occurs when we find characters similar to Holmes in qualitatively similar fictions. For instance, we can imagine that it is prefixed that Holmes lives at 221B Baker Street, but Holmes lives in a bank is not, although it would be not too difficult to write a fiction where Holmes does live in a bank. For instance, we could write a Sherlock Holmes that has kept up with the times. It is prefixed that Holmes lives at 221B Baker Street, or it is unprefixed that 221B Baker Street is a bank. So here we can consider transworld identity, where prefixing denotes a set of possible worlds, one at which Holmes lives at 221B Baker Street, and in a similar fashion, I live at New Babbage, or Reddit Music lives at New Babbage, or I am on deployment at New Babbage, or I am on deployment at New Babbage, but I am slacking off, or I am on deployment at New Babbage, but I am enjoying some well-deserved R&R. So if we look at dwellings, then we could say that Red 8 Music's current habitation is in New Babbage or Microtech, or we could say that Red 8 Music possesses a number of personal items, including a Drake Cutter and an RSI Aurora, or that he's on deployment at the moment, but enjoying some well-deserved R&R.